Alright kids, I apologize for not being at work today, but here is the lectures which we would have had. So I think we were at, I don't know for sure where we are, but I think maybe we're at assassination. If not, this is kind of just a review. Remember, you are responsible for filling out your notebook, the fill-in-the-blank notebooks, the notes that you have in your notebook. You're responsible to write them down through this while watching this video. We talked about, oops, sorry about that, kids. We had that, obviously. We talked about the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which was done by a Serbian nationalist group known as the Black Hand. Once they shot, Franz Ferdinand was the heir to the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and he was next in line to the throne. His assassination pretty obviously angered the current Emperor of Austria-Hungary, and of course there's a lot of resentment. There was a big investigation. It turned out that Serbs gave the weapons used to kill the Archduke. It was no more than a pistol, a couple pistols, and some old hand grenades. But because they found evidence that Serbia did this, they declared war on Serbia. Well, Russia is a ally to Serbia, and so they of course declare war on Austria-Hungary. In turn, Germany then declares war on Russia because they're in an alliance with Austria-Hungary. France and Belgium declare war on Germany, and Great Britain declares war on Germany. And these alliances that were developed to prevent a war from happening ended up causing the war to happen. You have the Great War. Now every country in Europe except for a few neutral countries are at war with each other. And this is when the Great War, or what we will call World War I, began. Video you're going to see later. Taxes and technology. Well, the generals of the time were trained in what is called Napoleonic tactics, and you might not know the name, but you do recognize the tactic because this is how they fought wars how we fought wars up to the Civil War, where you stand side by side, shoulder to shoulder, and you march or charge the enemy head on in some sort of open field that they all could see you, and you look for some form of strategic advantage and charge the enemy at the right time, and you can defeat the enemy. And usually the best way this works is that if the larger the army you have, the more likely you are to win. Now, Napoleonic tactics work really well when you have musket-borne guns, but when you start having rifled muskets, or let alone guns that could fire without muzzle loading, meaning with a brass cartridge, like a typical bullet that you would think would be a bullet today, this tactic does not necessarily work, especially with the invention of the machine gun. As they ran and charged each other, they were quickly mowed down by the defensive machine guns. One person could fire 300 rounds a minute, could take down 1,000 men with a 10,000 man charge. It was a bloodbath at the beginning. And it resulted in something called trench warfare. Neither side could really fight each other head on. They just kept charging each other and eventually taking a line and then coming back and then losing that line. And basically what you have with trench warfare is that you stay underground in a large trench, and then every once in a while you make an attack, and then if you take the enemy's trench, then the enemy will move back to another trench that's behind the lines, and they would again defend it, and then eventually attack your trench again, and then the line will move back and forth. And what happens is that, well, I have it up here. We'll watch that video later. So you remain in the trenches until the attack was ordered. And you would have thousands, tens of thousands of people just charging, and then sometimes tens of thousands dead within just an attack. And all you end up gaining is just a mile of land. And then you end up losing it shortly after. And what happened is you had um, basically a war of attrition. Which means that you're fighting a war and just you're trying to outweather the enemy. I mean, nobody takes any true strategic ground. You just kind of fight each other and wait for the other enemy to tire out and quit. And it was the results was, of course, 10 million dead. Now they had ways to get people out of the trenches. I mean, they used artillery bombardments. They used poisonous gas, mustard gas. I'm going to read to you a poem from Whistler Owen when you get back that talks about a mustard gas attack. I'm also going to show you some footage of this war and some examples of what trenches look like when you get back. But feel free to, of course, look them up yourselves. The war went on 4 years. The U.S. didn't get involved until probably until the very end, till last year. There are several reasons why we ended up getting involved. One was the fact that we could not remain neutral. By 1917, Russia was experiencing something. They had the Russian Revolution. This is the communist revolution against the Tsar, and this led to the Russians giving up in the war. They ended up, surrendering to Germany so they could fight their own problems in their own state. And a brutal civil war involved, leading to the formation of the Soviet Union. I'll give you some more information on that later, but it's the beginning of a rivalry between the United States and this country. So the Soviet Union is now involved, and as Russia's out, now Germany can turn all of its troops and concentrate all of its troops up to into France, then the Western Front, where they could easily take out France. I mean, they're literally a few miles from Paris. People could see the artillery explosions from Paris. The United States was getting more and more and more upset by German submarine warfare, especially with the sinking of the Lusitania. Now, this happened in 1915. It was 2 years before the United States got involved, but it was one of the things that angered us. We were sending weapons to the British. We started off sending them through convoys, but German submarines would sink those convoys. So instead, to trying to deceive the Germans, we started to give munitions and supplies to Great Britain in the cargo holds of passenger liners, because we knew that it was against military or naval code to attack passenger liners. And instead, the Germans found out about this, and they targeted ships like the Lusitania. Lusitania sank. There's rumors that there were 2 explosions. One was the torpedo. The other was the ammunition that exploded during the fire in the boat. So, I mean, it's kind of a little bit our fault that the Lusitania sank. But, of course, we blame the Germans. And truly, they did make the attack. The United States economic political ties to Great Britain. We have traded and had ties to Great Britain, even though we have had wars with each other and we had disagreements. We have been pretty civil, and we are trade partners. The thing is, if Germany were to win this war, the question was, would we be trade partners with Germany? Granted, there are a lot of Americans in the United States that are of German descent, and we were reluctant to participate in this war because, think about it. You have people who are first generation immigrants. They'd be fighting their cousins in some cases, and a lot of people resented this war. But the idea, people started to think, well, if Germany were to win, what would happen to us? Would we trade with them? Would we have to learn German? Would they try to invade our country? If they think they take over Europe, are they going to go for the rest of the world? Is it possible? And so, mainly, with our ties to Great Britain, we were to get involved. Then there's this Zimmerman telegram, and it's on the right of this screen, and you can read for it yourself. But in this telegram, it essentially states that if Germany asked Mexico for an alliance, and if Mexico were to have an alliance with the United States with Germany, then when the United States were to lose the war, they would regain Arizona, Texas, and New Mexico. Those same states that they lost, um, those same areas, territories that they lost during the Mexican Wars in the early 1800s. And now the U.S. gets involved. The war ends within a year. We have fresh troops. The other nations had nothing. They're all tired. It didn't take long for the United States to win this war. So now the United States, since we were like the saviors of Europe, we became the country that had to orchestrate the peace plan. And usually when you make a peace treaty, the president is in charge of that. And President Wilson becomes the first president to go to Europe during his presidency and in order to push for his peace plan. He thought this war was so awful that we would end all wars, and he called it the war to end all wars. And so he came up with a 14-point plan to peace, and of course it's called the 14-point peace plan. He took it, and there's one point was that no one was to be at fault. You're not to blame any country. The other was to ensure that there are other countries that allow Germany to remain Germany, but also allow other countries to reemerge. The other was that Germany wouldn't have to pay any reparations, meaning they didn't have to pay anything because the idea was that no one's at fault, that no one's going to be expected to pay outrageous amount of debt to another country. And there's a bunch of other points. And the 14th point is Wilson says that is the creation of something called the League of Nations. The League of Nations the idea is to have a peacekeeping organization of a bunch of countries, and they solve their problems by talking rather than shooting each other. It's the predecessor of the United Nations that we have today, a little bit different, but again, the idea is using diplomacy rather than war to solve problems. Well, here's what happened. In Versailles, France, it's called the Treaty of Versailles, countries looked at all the parts of 14 points, says, I don't like this, I don't like this, I don't like this, until they get to point 14 and says, oh, I like this League of Nations idea, and they click on that. So they rejected everything that Wilson worked for, especially the reparations. In fact, what happened is that, first of all, Europe was carved into a bunch of different states. They did allow Germany to remain, but it was significantly weaker. Germany was not allowed to have an army greater than 100,000 men. Germany had to pay billions, $80 billion in reparations, and money in which they could never possibly have. And in response, the French would just, if they couldn't pay their debts, would be able to take over their factories, establishments to pay off their debt. So basically what this allowed the French to do is to go into Germany, into German mines and German factories and say, okay, you're producing natural resources for France now. And of course, this ended up hitting them in the rear later, 25 years later with World War II. Another thing, there's a guy, he was a corporal, okay, lost his job when they demilitarized Germany. And this corporal's name was Adolf Hitler. He tried his best at being an artist and failed, and decided to become very involved in the political scene. Created the Nazi Party, and of course, you know the story from there. World War I was not finished with the Treaty of Versailles. World War I was put on pause with the Treaty of Versailles because the World War II is definitely a continuation of what happened with World War I. We do learn our lessons from World War II about requiring countries to pay reparations. Now, when Wilson came back, upset that most of his 14 points was gone, but yet his best part of his 14 points, the League of Nations, was accepted, Wilson comes back, and he has to bring his peace treaty has to be approved by the Senate, and that is part of the Constitution. So the Senate is composed is almost entirely of Republicans who hate Wilson. and who are so sick and tired of this world war that they want America to be isolated. They believe what's called isolationism. And the best way to keep us isolated is to prevent Americans from joining this League of Nations. And they vote against the League of Nations. They vote for the peace treaty, but not for the League of Nations. This is an interesting thing. The United States creates the League of Nations, but never joins. And this also probably was a good, this is probably a good reason why World War I occurred. And that, I believe, is all for today. As we were going to look over the maps when next we meet. Hope you all have a good day. Thank you.